Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a music discussion segment with our good friend, the Goblin King, Apoptosis 808. I'm about to jump into voice chat with him. We are going to play Defense of the Ancients Episode 2 with the sound muted so we can focus on the sounds of these amazing albums. Let's go to the audio. Let's do one of these. Master volume down to 0. We haven't won a game in a while in Dota 2, so it's very clear that we don't care about that kind of thing. We're going to be focusing on the music discussion itself. You are free to discuss the music as you wish in the chat. Today we're going to be going over 2 albums all the way through start to finish. The first one is Odyssey to the West by Slice the Cake. The other one is Exercises in Futility by Mgla. I won't explain them too much because that's the content of this discussion. Without further ado, I will now join this voice channel. Apoptosis. Wait, it's connecting. My internet has been spotty today. Apoptosis.
Hello, Neuro.
It's all dude.
Hello. What's up, man? How you doing?
Not too much. A little bit sleepy, but we had some really important things to talk about today, so feeling like it's a good day to fight the good fight, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good day to listen to some music and play some Dota 2.
Yes, so I sent you 2 cassette tapes in the mail. You should have received them by now. Did you receive them?
I got one, and then the other one I'm just gonna go. I have actually Tom the magician is over here. He's just gonna do a live performance for me, so should be taken care of for the rest of it.
That's awesome. I did start a local recording of this, so we're immune to getting muted. But
Try to mute us now.
But
Sounds
we
good.
only go over the most underground shit, so we should be fine anyway.
All our songs we listen to are less than 10 views on YouTube.
Yep.
Easy.
Once you
All
get
right,
to
so I
the
think we're
15
doing-
views point, that's called a sellout band, and they're just in it
Yeah.
for the money. They have no passion for actual good music anymore.
Actually correct there.
Okay, so we can probably queue up, because that takes a little bit.
Are you going with Shadow Fiend again today? Oh my god.
We could kind of play whatever, I think, because the focus here is the music discussion, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Unless I queued as mid. Did I queue as mid? Probably. Someone else wants to go mid, though. I'm confused if I got my role or not. Okay, well, I'll just play anti-mage and just focus on last hitting.
Nice.
All right. So we have the album. Just to give people a basic overview of this album, I want to give a shout out to Morris. He's a regular of a few Twitch streams, Apoptosis and mine among them. And he recommended this to me. It's outside the normal lanes of what I typically go for and also what you go for, Apop. The genre is listed as progressive deathcore. And a lot of people think that these genre names are kind of silly, but it does narrow down things in a bit of a useful way. Progressive, in this case, it doesn't mean that they're like a bunch of liberals talking about that. It's actually about the duration of the songs and the way that the ideas and the phrases develop over the course of a song and an album. So it's not like phrase, chorus, phrase, chorus, shit like that, as you have in a lot of pop music and simpler stuff. It is more longer form in telling a story. And then deathcore is kind of similar to death metal with some differences. The vocals are a little bit different, and it does have some breakdowns that hit and are especially heavy. So it's not as consistently hammering away as death metal is, but it is still an extreme music genre. And this act is actually no longer together. They have a deathcore person and then a few people who helped out who are not normally involved in deathcore, but they wanted to do this Slice the Cake project together. And this album and the other companion piece were actually released by 2 members of the band on April Fools, which really upset the rest of the band. They ended up disbanding as a result of it. So kind of a meme situation for this, but
Oh my god.
it is one of the most epic works of music I've ever heard. There's a whole bunch of emotion to it, and its title, Odyssey to the West, is about a pilgrim who's very fanatical about his beliefs. He gets exiled, and he wanted to go to the West on a pilgrimage to understand God and the universe and all that stuff. But he left his lover behind, so he's got some mixed feelings about that. And it's got a mixture of spoken word, clean vocal singing, and the kind of deathcore growling and stuff like that. So I'm ready to get this started whenever you are, bud.
Yeah, I would say for sure. I'm good to go.
Okay.
You want to give us the countdown?
Heck yes, my sir. Let's say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
And while the intro is getting started, you know this, Neuro, but I have never listened to this album before. I know you've listened to it a couple times at least. But I did mention while I was in the death metal band, there were several members of the band I was with that were super into this album. So
we find ourselves again.
So you haven't been into it, but you've heard of it.
To be standing.
heard of it, yep, but never listened to it.
How Arkham would be ashamed. Or so the dreams appear to say. See, they tell of numb and wretched men who strayed far from the path, and they tell of nameless, faceless men whose every detail shrouds itself in myth. And with poeticism, with insight, and with tragic glee. What does this speak of me if I look on so curious and unappeased? Would such a thing be read and understood so easily? If it was to be, then surely it would be. This surely is a dichotomy so prevalent and irrevocably elegant. So I've come to see. Then why does it hold me so? What agency is mine to bring to a union with the preordained? What of the fates to gain from a destitute and witless being, long discarded by the way? So is this a treatise or is this a game? Is this pleasure or is this pain? Or is there something more elusive? Perhaps this could be destiny. But as long as I draw breath, I'll not let it make a fool of me. Lest I wander to the gallows and hang until I'm dead. I've seen the mountain in my dreams, and I shall see it till the end.
So that's the first track.
Wow, that was quite an opener.
Yeah, very epic. The thing that really distinguishes this vocalist is his range. A lot of times you can scream well, but you suck at singing. This guy can clearly do both reasonably well.
Okay, and so now we're in a bit more of the deathcore elements that you were talking about a bit earlier.
Yeah. And you can really get the progressive element too with the different feelings of each phrase and section. Like we haven't visited this kind of vibe before. So it doesn't really get too much into the deathcore groove and stay there.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of sort of genre changes, which was something I was gonna, I think this song nearing the end, but it seems like they never really stick to one theme for too long. And there's a progressive deathcore group that I know that you're really familiar with, that does that quite a bit. They really float around between a lot of different ideas. And it seems like these guys, they're taking that same kind of concept, but they're doing it with a completely different style of music.
And I don't know if anyone is reading the lyrics in this, but the lead vocalist is the main character of the story. He is basically acting out the situation, the emotions, and the experience of that character. He's not a narrator, which I think a lot of times the vocalist is a narrator of a lot of these extreme metal storylines that are in the lyrics.
I would say a really common theme between a lot of, if not almost all of the albums we've listened to so far on this kind of segment have been, they're all interconnected. So while each song might have its own kind of completion, it all links together into the next one, if that makes sense. I think they do a really good job with actually giving a conclusion to each song, which we don't always see in a lot of albums we've been listening to. But you can see that it ties in really well to the next one, and it's sort of telling that grandiose tale, which I'm always a really big fan of. So when would you find yourself listening to an album like this?
This one actually helped me a whole bunch through the breakup that I went through about a year and a half ago. It is a lot more melancholy and somber in its tone. I wouldn't really say that it's like a direct hype album. In that category, I would say just put on Amon Amarth and you're good to go. Something like that. That's more general, like, ooh, rah, you can do stuff, you're a warrior. This is a really sad story. It involves a lot of passion and there's a whole bunch of depth to it, so I would gravitate toward this if I was going through some kind of struggle and it fit my current situation.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. This is a lot. You mentioned it before we even started. There's a lot of kind of emotion that goes into this album. You can certainly tell quite a lot of anger, which is being dealt with, and a lot of it. Yeah, those really high percussive beats, very fast tempo. that is super prevalent, even in songs when they go. It always seems to return to that. Some albums I think kind of have a really key style that even if they stray from it, they always return in some way to like some linking factor. And I think this one, that linking factor or that style that it constantly returns to is a really, really aggressive drum.
Yeah,
Like right here. Sometimes it can be really interesting to me to think about, like, okay, what is the underlying style? What are they building everything off? And then that can kind of tell you a lot of the like kind of tone and quality as far as what they're trying to achieve. And we've talked about that a lot too, as far as like what are they trying to tell you about? You know, are they trying to get you excited to do something? Are they trying to commiserate in some shared suffering or something like that? And I think this one is a bit more on that shared suffering side. Sometimes what I like to do as well, when I've not seen a band live, but I'm hearing their music for the first time, or maybe the first time, is I like to think of like, what type of show would this be? Would I be sitting in a chair? Would it be really dark? Would there be tons of flashing lights everywhere? It can just be kind of another interesting practice to put yourself in whatever mindset or mood that the band is trying to get you in, so that you can fully kind of experience that music the way that they're intending for it to go. And so this one, I'm definitely envisioning quite a lot of lights, quite a lot of people moving around, so to speak, anyway. Maybe those people are punching each other, who knows?
Yeah, you've got also different kinds of etiquette for different genres of metal shows. Normally we go for black metal, which has basically a bunch of headbanging. People are typically more of music nerds and collectors, more so than a lot of other genres on average. There will occasionally be some moshing, but that's not super common, at least from my experience. Deathcore, I actually have not been to a deathcore show. So if it was a deathcore audience at this show, would they mosh? Would they do that hardcore dance where they swing their fists around and punch people randomly?
There might be some people, but they would largely be considered to be... I don't know that there's any genre that really is like, yeah, swing your fists around in that wacky fashion that nobody actually would... I think this would definitely be a mosh crowd. This style of music is similar to what was really is and was really popular here on the island for metal. Majority of the metal here is deathcore. Not a lot of true kind of death metal or black metal even. We have a really huge military presence, so this is kind of the type of music they're into a lot of the time. Not to be stereotyping, but kind of just the state of it, and which is cool. So these are definitely more, you'll see separate barriers for people that want to get rough and tough and move around a lot. Even if you're not really like doing really physical moshing, even if you're kind of just running around and pushing people around, you know, that can really quickly sour your show if that's not what you're wanting to do.
Yeah, I've noticed that at a lot of the shows that I've been to, sometimes the environment and the crowd really shapes how enjoyable the experience is. Because if you have a bunch of people being obnoxious around you, it's really hard to focus on even a really high quality performance.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I would say the crowd is probably equally important to the how well the band is playing that day.
Pilgrim's ways of bliss and a stagnant glimpse? Or is there something to be said for the comfort of the nest? Because it doesn't seem so fleeting anymore.
One really strong aspect of taste for music like this is the vocals. There are certain vocal types that just don't work for some people. So for this style, this is a very deathcore vocal that he's doing for his low growl. Some people don't like that, and even if it's well executed for what it is, it's not really going to be a go-to for you. And that's okay. So for you, what's your kind of perspective on this style?
I would say it's not necessarily my most favorite style, but if done in a... I guess what's the best way to explain that? This isn't the vocal style I'll seek out. I think I'm much more of a like black metal focused kind of style vocal. That's what I like to hear. More of the lows or those really weird kind of screechy highs, as unpleasant as that. But when you put it in conjunction with a really excellent kind of accompaniment of instruments, I can definitely get into it. So long as it's not overwhelming and pervasive. We've talked about the space that the music takes up, where the vocals sit with the band. These vocals are sitting not too much in front. You're not focusing only on the vocals when they're coming in. You're still hearing everything else. You still hear the drums. You still hear the guitars. There are these sort of periods of purposeful silence or more lulls with the other instruments to bring the vocals forward when he's doing these cleans, I think. But for the most part, it's the vocals are sharing the space pretty much equally with everything else. And so I think that makes the style of these death growls that normally I'm not against them. I'm not particularly fond. I think that makes them a lot more interesting and kind of dynamic.
Deathcore is not my top genre, but I love these. I think he does a really good job. It's powerful and heavy. It's grating, but it doesn't hit the points where it sounds weird to me. Like, the thing that is a hard no for me is the dying pig sound in a lot of death metal and grindcore and stuff.
Yeah.
But this is good. And his clean vocals are such a great contrast to it as well.
I really like their range of music, not just the vocals. The vocals have a super wide range, like you were saying, but the actual instruments themselves, they've played quite a lot of different styles already. There was some of that like steel string in the very beginning, sort of that almost cowboy twang to it, if you will. There was some gent, there was some really heavy blast beats. There's been quite a lot of really great stuff. This has been really good so far.
This album for me really does a good job of balancing the intensity with the relief. Because for the main parts of it, they're like the full deathcore. They're pretty intense, and sometimes you're kind of holding through it like you're making your way through a storm. And it's pretty tough, and then just then is typically when they'll transition and give you that relief.
Yeah, and that, I think, plays to that completing an entire idea. Each song seems to complete an entire idea while still leading into the next one. And they definitely have, I think I've kept track of it, most of it has been at least a complete silence in between some songs. Mm-hmm. I think all of them have done a complete stop.
Passage, though. What would such things be without a pen with which to write, or a voice with which to speak? If I found you gazing back at me as the second night descends. Time steals us all away one day, does it not? It robs us of the things we want to hold on to the most. Believe me when I say that it lies in wait for no man or woman to make their haste. Just as easily 1,000 years would go to waste. The working's all the same, before the eye of God, is it not? Perhaps it is a plot I've lost. Perhaps I've lost my way. At this point, are they not the same? Am I not treading the one and only pilgrim's westward way? To do the workings of the one and only thing? Have I not come this very way? Search of higher things at stake. I have seen it manifest, and I have seen it ache. And I have been the squander. And I have been the mirth as their eyes have had from heaven sent to carry them to the verge as they foster their impurity and mock the very way in which the energy and the murmuring shall split from night to day.
Yeah, super big style change here again.
Remember to wheel out the piano at your deathcore show, okay?
Where's this band from?
US, I think.
Is it Australia? I thought they were Australia.
Nailed the Scars is Australian. Can we get a double check on that? Where's Slice the Cake from, Chad? Help us.
Please.
Chat says this band is from the UK. No longer a band, but when they were a band, they were from the UK. For the king. Really nice resonance to the piano notes.
Are they doing a harp in the background? Is that what that is?
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I found love, looking tethered to the siren song. Even though you were near, I was empty. It must have been so plain to see. Oh, how I injured my love.
So that song is him addressing his lover who he left behind, with the clean vocals all the way through. It's a pretty cool change of pace. It also doesn't feel out of place, surprisingly. I think a lot of times it does. Even in bands that are pretty well known. It just seems like, yeah, we're gonna put a singing song in this album, but I like this one quite a bit.
Yeah, I like that one. That was I'm usually not a fan of a lot of cleans in death metal or deathcore. Well, I don't really listen to deathcore, but I don't like a lot of cleans on its own. I don't think it was too out of place in terms of the album itself. And then on its own, I could see it being a song I would enjoy. I don't know. I think for me personally, the kind of in the middle of the album, it doesn't fit super well for what I normally like, and I'm trying to figure out why that is. It could just be more of a personal taste kind of thing,
There is a hollowness,
which is more than likely the answer.
hallowed in concentric circles splayed against a canvas. Deep red, veins in hand with epitomes and documents of what has ceased to be. What was least to me, a dying light in fragile arms, an art to miss your victory march for me to chase, for me to run, for me to torment you and I, until we fall again, amidst a calm and cooling breeze, amidst our spiritual disease, as our shadows stretch across the land. This is a twilight of my very aura, so I fear the end is there, as though time itself will be fit by grace to crawl and to walk, to see the
This is pretty interesting. In another bands I've seen do this too, where they'll have basically how the album they'll do that same thing again, but just in a different kind of
The desperation in his voice gives me chills. It's a very good performance. This, to me, seems closer to acting than to singing or screaming. He's performing, but it's not in a way that he's hitting notes intentionally. He's speaking his mind in a way that has like tons of emotion and feeling behind it.
Yeah, this is a style of cleans that, I mean, if you would call this cleans. Spoken word, I guess, maybe more of a apt description of it.
Still, a temple stands amidst the smoulders, does it not? Did you not think that the pilgrim's way would be fraught with the trials and the tests of your hopes and fears laid bare upon the rocks? What great cowardice is on display, with your writhing and your self-dismay? Are you a man? Are you a mouse? Or are you but a foolish child who's come to cry out in the middle of the night? Or is it that you're divine? Born to live and born to die as the waxing and the waning of the tides. Have you come to
So is this supposed to be like the idea of her girlfriend in the song, you think?
No. This is more of his imagined voice of God. I would have to reread it, but it's more of a third party who is seeing his plight, his position, and where he is based on where he started from. His lover would not be able to see where he is.
Ah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I can't make out all the words that are going on, but that seems to fit. I like that, I like that. I think there's an interesting distinction that I kind of just came to the realization of when you're talking about black metal versus like death metal and death. Um, I feel like death metal and deathcore talks about more of the individual, like me, this is my plight, or this is that person's plight, or something that's. Whereas black metal is more of a societal thing. It kind of talks to the masses at large. This is the shared interaction of people. This is the shared suffering of a community. And so I think that's one of the reasons, besides just the style of music, that makes death metal and deathcore a bit more relatable, because they're singing about real things that are super easy to relate to, even if it's in sort of this fantastical way of taking this epic journey to the west, having to leave behind the ones you love. You can put that in relatable terms because it's an individual who's doing it.
Yeah, I think we talked about that in the context of the Kriegsmaschine album, in that black metal is more collectivist. It's more about the scene than it is about the individual, per se. Whereas, yeah, this has one key character that you're kind of following him along on his journey and his story. And I think everyone has periods of their life that resonate more as journeys where you're going into uncharted territory and trying new things and running into stuff that is unexpected. One of the things that, if you focus on the lyrics and the development of his voice throughout the album, a lot of his expectations for God and discovery and spirituality are wrong, and he feels abandoned and disconnected from the ideals that he started with based on how his experience differs from that. And that really resonated with me in my personal evaluation of my faith. So I think that's an extra level of connection and intimacy for me listening to this album in particular, is I went through that journey of trying to assess, are my beliefs true? Are they real? Because I'm very passionate about them. And I love the God that I believe in. I love Christ, all this kind of stuff. But I really want to know what the truth is, even if I'm not going to like it. And during certain steps along the way, you discover something that means that you have to concede some ground. And you can't rely on that in the same way that you could before. And this character, the Pilgrim, is venturing out and exploring his own perspective on the world and reality, weighed against his expectations of it. And he gets let down a whole bunch. And I feel that.
Interesting. Another between games, I'm kind of taking a look at the lyrics of what's playing. Do you know, I mean, from listening to this, so sometimes what I've noticed bands will do if they're trying to tell sort of these epic tales is they'll separate the voice of the character versus the voice of the narrator. And oftentimes what I've noticed is the voice of the character, those cleans or those kind of harsh cleans, where the voice of the narrator or the, God figure or those, the death growls.
So I believe they're all the main character except for the woman's voice that appeared, and there is going to be another unique voice later on that is different from his voice and the lady's voice that is a separate character. So my assessment is that there are 3 unique characters who have a perceived voice in the album. The range of screaming versus clean vocals, I think, is more of the range of the character's situation and his mood, rather than them being separate characters.
Okay, interesting. I like that. I don't mind that at all. Oh, funky technical breakdown. Oh. Huh.
There's the other voice.
Interesting.
That's more of like a snarling beast sound.
Such is the
Yeah.
beauty, yonder
Okay. So this is sort of I was gonna say it feels like almost like a clown character. The music itself kind of changed to a really almost goofy, haphazard, and then the vocals reminded me actually from the Karak Conjuring album. This is no fairy tale. There's a sort of dark, evil clown character that sounds really similar to that, oddly enough. And the fact that this song is Ash and Rust 2, The Dark Carnival, I don't know if that was super unintentional there. Was this a 4-member band?
I believe it's 3. There's the vocalist who also writes the lyrics, concept synthesizer. And then there's guitar, bass, backing vocals, programming, production, artwork is another member. And then the third member does compositions, orchestral arrangements, and musical thematics. Not your usual setup. Usually you've got guitar, drum, bass, and vocals as your kind of standard set.
Yeah, it's really impressive, the range that they're able to hit with so few members. I mean, there's been tons of other single-member or 2-member bands that could produce some insane works of art. But I'm impressed at how much this sounds, I guess it's very clean. Everything sounds correct. It's in its rightful place.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing feels out of place. Good old 808 crap. And so I'm just kind of now looking at the track list that's down below. And we've talked about how sometimes albums will be kind of constructed as chapters in a book. Oh shit, hold on, pause your thing. I accidentally backed out of my music. Oh god.
55:47.
Okay, let me get there. Okay, I'll let you count it down again.
All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so like I was saying, they sometimes they'll make it like chapters in a book, and especially even with Mgla, which we're gonna check out next, they don't really put individual titles to their songs. It's just the name of the album and then 1, 2, 3, I think all the way up to 7 or something like that. They do something similar. They have parts 1, 2, and 3 to a lot of their songs that they do. So I'd be interested to see those individual chapters and kind of read the lyrics, because I feel like this is a band that's taken a lot of time in writing the kind of story of this album. I can definitely tell there's a really interesting story. I unfortunately haven't been able to read it because we've been playing, but yeah, usually whenever I see, especially when there's so many parts, I don't know how many songs there are in total. Let's see, 4, 7, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 songs total. Interesting. Yeah, I would want to see those individual chapters.
Well, the ones that are listed with numbers, like 1, 2, 3, those are kind of like acts, I guess. You've got Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. More of larger chunks. And I think those would fit along with the phases of the character's progression. And I can definitely relate to that progression from the perspective of the Pilgrim, where you start out with a really optimistic state of mind that, I mean, yes, something happened, but you have high hopes for what could go on, and then that initial setting out as an individual can be really invigorating as well, where you have a lot of passion and courage, and stuff hasn't really gone bad for you yet. And then as we're getting more toward the end of the album, he's bearing more of the dark side of being an exile in a foreign place without the same comforts and security and all this. And that's causing him to reevaluate a lot of his beliefs. And again, this connects with my story as well, where if you believe your God to be all-powerful and this kind of thing, that when there's very clear and direct suffering and you can't really pin down what you did wrong to deserve that, it feels unfair, and that's really hard to internalize and accept as a believer.
I mean, after all, such arduous and fitful ways into the deep would be wasted.
So have you read through the lyrics of this, like, while listening to it before?
Yes, once, and that was when I kind of first discovered it, so I don't remember all of the details. But one thing that I sometimes will try to do, and we talked about this with regards to, I think, the cosmic black metal, where it's not really, there aren't lyrics in it that tell a clear story, it's just sounds, but you can still have mental pictures of what's going on. Sometimes I like to favor my own personal narrative that fits with the tones of the music, rather than to necessarily try to focus on the story that was written. And this album I would put into that category pretty clearly for me.
Man, this band had a lot of ideas. I'll tell you that. Their musical style is just fucking all over the place.
And I think a part of the reason why the band didn't stay together after this was because if you have sufficiently different points of view and ideas of what the content should be, it's more and more difficult to find common ground. So it's not like a bunch of deathcore veterans who are like, yeah, let's make some kick-ass deathcore. You've got people from way outside of that sphere who have their own ideas of how things should progress and what should be prioritized and emphasized.
Right, and I think this is where it can be really interesting, even within the genres themselves, and we've said this before with like comparing, you know, like Eldamar or Paladin Brood and Mgla and Freak Machine. Though they're all considered black metal at their core genre, they're super and widely different. The valley of that genre is just huge. And I think this is a really great, kind of case in point for that fact. With this is death metal or deathcore, but this has got just so many different ideas going on. It's like It's really interesting to keep up with, and for a first time listen, it's I wouldn't say it's confusing, but there's definitely a lot that my mind is trying to latch onto, and they're quickly discarded and go to something new very fast, while still maintaining that really brutal drum kind of line that they do every now and again. I think with almost every song they've done it. I've heard a lot of progressive metal inspired, like I was mentioning before, kind of Opeth with their range of music, some Meshuggah style guitars with the gent, some really interesting cleans that I've not heard used before, where it's almost like a halfway point between a growl and just clean. That's not done often, and I think the reason why it's not done often is because you can't do it right a lot of the time. But they do a really good job of it.
Hold the phones, we just got an announcement. Moss
Hold the
Neotech
food.
just linked a Facebook post of them getting back together, and this is December 20th of 2019, so fairly recent.
And all rejoice. Praise God. Oh, this is a big old poster. Oh, they're doing a tour. Huh. Ah, real life sound. This has made an appearance on I think every single album we've listened to.
So tell me what you see.
I mean the waves.
Do you see
Waves or rain or battle noises. It seems like every album we listen to, there's at least some element of like environmental noises taken into place.
I love that question in the chat. Is this the same album? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
That's
different
kind of
sound.
what I was saying earlier. Tons of different sounds, tons of different styles going on in this one album.
So tell me what you see. You see a pilgrim or a human being, or just another dancing monkey whose songs you want to sing. So tell me what you think my reason ain't to be. Yeah, so why my ego runs so unrestrained around in my body.
I'm curious how they're gonna end this album.
It's pretty long.
Yeah, this is an hour and 20 minutes. That's a good amount of songs.
If you asked me before I linked it to you how long I thought it was, I would not have said more than an hour. Once
There's
you've
very few albums I've seen that are over an hour.
once you've listened to it a few times, a lot of the main phrases and transitions you anticipate and you are ready for them to happen and you want them to happen, so they feel more like digestible chunks. I would agree the first time listening through it, it has so many changes that it'll get to a new unexpected territory and you ask a question like, is this the same album? Because it's very out of left field the first time that they would take it in that direction, but that's kind of how life is as well. It doesn't give you those really predictable transitions a lot of the time. Stuff will hit you in ways you don't expect, and that shapes us as people. And the way they do this in the album, it's not perfect obviously, but it's very bold that they would even try a project like this, and I think they make it work really beautifully. Now we're full on again. Let's go.
Yep.
This chord progression is pretty similar from the earlier tracks.
I think that they, I like to compare music to books a lot, if you can't tell. And books and stories will do that too. They will sort of end the book a lot of the time the way that it started, or the start of the book will be a real kind of a foretelling of what a foreshadowing, you know, in most cases. Not with every book, obviously, and not with every album, but those sort of similarities between earlier songs and later songs, I don't think that those are accidental.
They just run out of ideas, so they repeat the first song.
Yeah. Just play it again. They will never know. It's not like two guys are just gonna sit here and listen to this critically for an hour and 20. And I think that most albums that tell a story like this and kind of go through a wide range of different instrumentations, or well, often they'll start and end on that sort of base that they've set for themselves. Like, we're a deathcore, we're a death metal band. This is our traditional style of that music, in the middle, we're going to take sort of a diversion from it, but then we're going to end it going back to what we, you know, we're known for, or we're really good at. And I think that the deathcore and death metal sort of genre, the fans of it are really, they're hardcore, they're loyal, you know, they really like what they like and they don't like what they don't like. And I could see this album being not for a lot of deathcore people even. It has a super wide range, so I think that starting and ending it with a really solid bass in deathcore and death metal is smart. It makes you feel, I don't know, full circle. Everything's kind of been wrapped up nicely.
So with all that said and done, here's the truth of the matter. No masks, no games. Not anymore. See, I brought this upon myself, but let it not be said that this was anything but spurious at its very best. The tides of change have ebbed and flowed between a multitude of ones and zeros. And was it not clear from the start that this was all to be transient? How does one reconcile the ramifications of a tale that's no longer relevant? The answer is, you don't. Because even if it's no longer relevant to me, it's still relevant to someone. And a story once told will speak to those still headlong in a storm, still torn asunder and dashed against the rocks. Oh, westward men, young faceless men, young men of race of rose, your darkened souls still yet to come. Walk all you want and all you same to direct your solid path, where the fishes and your sorrow heals. The warrior holding mounts. Mark my words, the storm will come again. It always comes again, and in its clutches will they lay the madness and the ecstasy of the singular and holy tale exploded onto the canvas. Even if it does not come from me, there are 1,000 men who came before, and millions who will yet come after. And with that said, I refuse to let a human being hang on my every waking word without getting certain the same courtesy to myself. To do so would be a fallacy when I recognize the error of my own ways. And I too have to be held accountable. I have we all. But I digress. See, it wasn't so clear at the start that this would all be transient. Got lost along the way, crept within the murk of my own poetry and beheld by my mistakes. See, the intention was for healing, but what I found is not the same. See, this path is fraught with anger, and the way is fraught with rage. Bound towards the ignorant and simple minds who see it to decay. And I refuse to be a martyr, and I refuse to be a saint, but so I say, this is what happened to the
Stylistically, I really hope that that's the last of the vocal.
That
Well,
is
hot diggity damn.
Odyssey to the West. Slice the cake. Yeah, the last line, I have nothing else to say. I agree, that was a good point to wrap it.
Yeah, I'm like, boy, don't. Let's end it there because that's a really powerful end. I wasn't sure because there was like another 2 minutes, but yeah, I really liked that as a first time listen. It was super complex, really technical, really varied. It had a little bit of something for everyone, I think. If you enjoy the genre of death metal, deathcore, and you're not super stuck in your ways, and you're not opposed to branching out, I think this is a really good. You said Morris told you about this album?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. He listens to a ton of super technically varied albums. If I had to put this in like 3 words, I would say it'd be, let's see, diverse, grandiose, and painful. And there was not a lot of happiness in this song. I don't think, just from the musical choices. I didn't read the lyrics. Who knows? Maybe the lyrics were all bubbly and happy, but I don't think so.
It's very dark, and it's dark in a way that is relatable to a human person's journey. And I think that makes it a hard listen, but oftentimes that kind of listen can be really cathartic if you're going through a struggle. So I was articulating the different struggles I've had and journeys that I impose into this music. So the story becomes accompaniment to my life story in a way, and that can be really helpful to process those feelings and let them out. It doesn't feel good, but it is a really healthy behavior to find outlets for your own emotion where you can take a step away and process a lot of the difficulty that you've been through and just let that be what it is and savor those feelings. There's a lot of tragedy and whatnot in a person's life, and if you're in that kind of headspace, listening to some poppy song about you want to be with someone who you find to be sexy, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit, so it doesn't connect with you. So this album connects with me in a very deep way that a lot of other albums don't. But at the same time, the length of it being 2 hours and the variation within it means that it doesn't really make sense to listen to in a lot of situations as well. So it's not like a go-to album, rain or shine, any mood you're in, just put on Slice the Cake, Odyssey to the West. It's a very, very, like you said, grandiose album that is amazing at what it is, but it's not very accessible. It's relatable for some people if they kind of think about how it relates to their own life story. But yeah, I found it to be incredible, and I'm not really a deathcore person, but this blew me away.
Yeah, I would definitely not call myself a deathcore person either. I usually don't listen to really anything from the genre. But being that I've heard of this so much, and now this is my first time listening to it, I definitely see why people enjoy it so much. Yeah, that's one thing I'll try to do is think about, okay, when would I listen to this album? When would I put this? Um, if this came on while I was driving, would I change it? Would I be okay with only listening to half of this album? Would I be okay with listening it on shuffle? Those are kind of a couple of the questions I'll ask myself. I think I mentioned when we were listening to the Atmospheric Black. Usually I won't put that on unless I can truly devote at least an hour that it will be on. I don't have to necessarily be crazy intently focused on listening to it, but I don't really want to stop it halfway through because there's just so many ideas that are going on, and I don't really feel like it's doing the music justice if you kind of just cut it off halfway through. And I think that this album, this band, I guess it's their only work so far, but as we've heard, I guess they're coming out with some new stuff, which is cool. I think that fits in that category, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think I would want to just I'll put on this one song from this album that I really like, and just listen to that. I think this is a listen to the whole thing or don't listen to it at all kind of album. And while I think it would be good to listen to in sort of tumultuous times, if you're having some difficult struggles going on, I think it can certainly help you go through that. I could see other people seeing this as like their daily drive. I could see a reason why some would like it to just to turn on if they can listen to the whole thing. It's refreshing. It's different. It's complicated, so it keeps your attention, but it also fits. It's a weird sort of feeling to describe, but that's the best I can do it.
In my personal perspective of this album, the Castle in the Sky, which is the track where the pilgrim is singing to his lover and it's full clean vocals all the way through, that's a midway point for me where I can listen to the first half and feel satisfied with that because it's about the length of a normal album up to that point, and it kind of completes the ideas as though you've completed those chapters. Someone mentioned Lord of the Rings in the chat during this. It's a very verbose and long album. So you could kind of think about Lord of the Rings is one story. It's 3 books. This is one album. But for me, up to Castle in the Sky could be its own album. And then after that could also be its own album. And the tone of the story changes a little bit as well as the delusions and optimism of the pilgrim are kind of shattered. And it darkens somewhat because my reading of it just kind of vaguely is the first half is him affirming his beliefs and sticking to his quest and dedicating. And then the second half is realizing a lot of the misconceptions that he had going into it and how a lot of people have made the mistakes that he is making before him and how it didn't turn out how he expected. And during the final track, he's assessing the value of him making those mistakes so that maybe through that story other people won't. That's a really tragic kind of story for a person, but that's how a lot of life is. Sometimes you're not the main protagonist of something that ends up in some huge glorious rescue story or some battle where you turn the tide and you beat the end bad guy. We see lots of media and stuff like that, but there are some really tough stories, and this album definitely is in that sort of spirit where it tells a tragic tale rather than an uplifting one. So while certain people could use this to process stuff kind of in the way that I do, if you are feeling pretty bad, sometimes it can just be more weight on top of that. So that makes it a pretty niche listen that isn't really a go-to for me that often. I have lifted with this album. I don't run with this album very much. The tempo changes are all over the place, so I like something that's a little bit more consistent for me to kind of emphasize my own rhythm of running. So that, and then for stream listening, it's very intense during the deathcore parts. I can feel it, and as a broadcaster, I empathize with my listeners, and I know that a lot of people have to kind of clench their fist and grit their teeth to even make it through those parts. So privately speaking, I enjoyed this album more than when I play it on stream for that reason. But it's been cool seeing some really positive comments in the chat as we've been going, such as "holy shit, this is epic," stuff like that.
Yeah, I could definitely see why people like this and why even black metal diehards like myself and you would be drawn to this easily.
Well, with all that squared away, are you ready to unpack one of the probably main albums that started us off on a musical friendship journey thing together? I think this is one of the first ones that we were both listening to kind of at the same time when we discovered each other's channels on Twitch. Mgla, I guess that's how you pronounce it. It's got 3 consonants in a row.
I think it's Mgla.
That's what I just said. Mgla!
No. You said Mgla. I said Mgla.
Mgla?
Leviosa. Not Leviosa.
Oh. Can someone in the chat type it out for us how to pronounce it?
Let me take a quick minute, and I will be right back, and I'm ready to take a look at this album for sure.
Fantastic. So yeah, Slice the Cake, that album, it does come across as pretty weighty and lofty in a lot of aspects. If I had to take a wild guess on how many times I've listened through it, it's probably in the neighborhood of 30 or so, and about 6 to 8 of those would have been on stream. So it's much more an off stream listen for me. And I have a a threshold for purchasing something and then putting it on my MP3 player, because there are a lot of albums that I like and I listen to them on stream, and they're part of the Ultra List playlist, which you can access in the Twitch chat. But some of them, I like them so much that I want to listen to them when I run, when I'm on my own, and just have a higher quality recording than a YouTube upload. And this is definitely in that set. It's also great for supporting the bands. If you can buy something from their Bandcamp or from one of their live shows, that's going to be the best for getting revenue to them. Something like Spotify or iTunes is very, very indirect support of the band. I just got this one off their Bandcamp, I think. Thank you, Moss, for updating the commands for song during this. I know some people joined partway through and they're like, what on earth is this? This is Music Discussion with Apoptosis. We have done this a few times in the past, covering 2 albums back to back usually. We've gotten releases from Behemoth. We did Kriegsmaschine, which is the same artist duo as Mgla actually, but a pretty different vibe in the way the music plays out. We listened to some cosmic black metal by his recommendation, and then this time some progressive deathcore of my recommendation. And this Mgla album we're about to go over, I've probably listened to 50 times. More than Odyssey to the West by Slice the Cake. Runtime of 42 minutes, 16 seconds, so it's way more digestible. I think about albums in terms of durations of the games that I play, so this is maybe 1 Dota game long. Slice the Cake is 1 long Dota game long.
It's a techies Dota game.
Yeah. I don't know how much of the lead-in you heard when you got back, but I did say that we covered Kriegsmaschine before, which is the same talent as Mgla, but it's a different project.
Yes, and normally with to kind of comment on that real quick, there's other bands that do that. I think Tool and Perfect Circle, right? That's their 2. A lot of them are involved in both of those, if I'm not mistaken.
I know Maynard is, but I don't know about the rest of the band.
Okay. Sometimes I have a hard time distinguishing between the 2 band sounds, but even in a really niche genre like black metal, to me, Mgla and Kriegsmaschine are super different.
Mm-hmm.
So I am at 000 and ready to go for this Exercises in Futility. Came out in 2015, took the black metal community by storm. They do have earlier works than this, but they were found off of this album, I think, and are regarded as some of the pillars right now as far as what the hotness is.
Yep, definitely. I'm ready to go. For general assessment for people who are unfamiliar with the genre, compared to Kriegsmaschine, compared to deathcore and cosmic black metal and stuff like this, this is one of the closer albums we can get to middle of the road black metal, where it's much heavier on the guitar with a sort of buzzing sound to it. It's not going to have the super heavy and deep and fast-hitting drums of stuff like Slice the Cake and Odyssey to the West, but it's also going to be more consistent overall in its sound from track to track, so you're not going to hear like weird banjo harp solo at some point in Exercises in Futility. But they do stuff so well, and you showed me a video of the drum work of this guy, which is ridiculous. He's doing multiple time signatures at the same time with each of his different limbs. So pay attention to the drums. The vocals are really, really interesting. The lyrics are very thoughtful. A lot of the tones of this band and this album are related to nihilism, and with the album title Exercise in Futility, a lot of it is about the futility of what people set out to do, the delusions that we carry, and the inevitability, a lot of the evil between humans that occurs in the world. And this is kind of an interesting aspect of music. Certain genres of music specialize really hard in certain elements of the human experience. You can't really have an album that captures every single feeling. The Odyssey to the West captured a lot of different feelings, but it did still have its anchor point in the darker side of a pilgrim's quest, missing a lover, stuff like that, rather than just the leaping around in valleys and hills and singing songs filled with joy. So similarly, Exercise in Futility is still on the darker side of things. It is smoother to me than Odyssey to the West. Maybe you can give your opinions as we're going. You ready to start, my dude?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it with the 3, 2, 1, go. As a contrast to Odyssey to the West, this is an album that I will listen to in almost any circumstance. Lifting, running, making pasta, meditating, being very angry, being very happy, being very confused, having a moment of clarity.
Yeah, these types of drums right here, he's really powerful. I don't even really know a super great descriptor for them. They're not like marching type, but they're like almost a drive forward. That's what makes this album so good for me. And if you can, you know, if this is your first time listening to this album, if you can kind of take a second and try to single out those drums first, you'll see a lot of that technicality that exists for black metal. Because I think at that point he was doing about 3 or 4 different time signatures. It's pretty. I really like the way that they do those full stops before they go into sort of those swinging back and forth, almost guitars and.
It's a breath before the plunge.
Yeah. And it's not long, which is, I like that. I like that it's a very quick, but there is just a single moment of there's no one playing anything. It's the lingering sort of sound of what's been going on. So for this band, they don't really stray outside of their musical style. I would say they stay pretty consistent to their sound. But each song is still pretty unique.
They do tie them up quite well so that you could listen to a track and feel pretty satisfied with how that went. I've listened to it pretty much exclusively for the whole album at a time, but it does complete the idea pretty nicely.
I think one of the concepts in this album that kind of continues all the way through are those full stops that I mentioned earlier. They do pretty, not often, but I think almost in every song there's a full stop somewhere.
Silence is a really powerful tool to use in music. I think it's not thought of as often as it's implemented.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. I mean, it's sort of interesting to think about. The entire reason you're listening to something is, you know, it's music. You want there to be a constant presence, but having a little bit of silence, having a little bit of a break between ideas can realign your focus in a bit, I guess.
His voice is very raspy, but it doesn't punch as hard as the deathcore vocals of Odyssey to the West for me. It's kind of like a really smooth whiskey, where black metal is pretty abrasive, but as far as that goes, this is really nice. And it's layered really well with the guitars, where it doesn't seem too much in the front that it's distracting you from the guitar work. Or the drums?
Yeah, I would say that actually this album is really similar in that way to Odyssey to the West, where they give equal importance, I think, to every. I think that, as you know, just by their nature, the vocals are a little bit in the front, just so they stand out a bit more. But for the most part, they give a lot of time and a lot of sharing to the other parts too. I like to think in black metal of a concept more that the vocals are their own kind of music. It's their own idea as well. Using it as an instrument as opposed to just something that has to be there.
I'm kind of curious of people's opinions of how easy it is to discern what he's saying. I think he gets a pretty high score for being able to hear words. Sometimes with heavy metal music, it's just straight up screaming, which can be fine. But a lot of people like the lyrics to be decipherable without reading the lyric booklet, for some of it at least.
Yeah, I think I would rate that pretty high for someone who listens to this music on a pretty constant basis. I would say that compared to other black metal and other even death metal, this guy is fairly under. Other people might think it's can't understand a word they're saying, but you sort of train your ear in a little bit of a way, and you can't pick up every word that they're saying necessarily.
This is a little bit unfair too. When you were AFK, I think I said I'd probably listened to this album more than 50 times.
I think I probably at least listened to it 30 to 40.
This was a go-to for me going to the gym when I was living in Austin. And I like it for runs a lot. And it's pretty good for airports too. Because the lyrics are about nihilism and the futility of things, and just seeing people trying to go through airport security and how much of a pain in the ass that is, it just fits.
Who knew there could be black metal about airports, dude? It's crazy.
Airport metal.
Yeah, there are definitely times when I've listened to their entire discography just in a night.
This song is like the keystone of the album.
Yes.
Has such an amazing balance between really catchy, almost funky riffs in this tune with the consistency of black metal buzz and that kind of wall of guitar and drum sound. It's repetitive just the right amount.
Yeah, they'll sort of keep repeating the same maybe section of instrumentation for just a little bit longer than maybe you normally would in a traditional sort of rock and roll or heavy metal song, but they do quickly go on to something different, but it is still similar. And that's sort of what binds all these songs together. That's sort of what keeps all these concepts glued in the same album, I think. Whereas with the previous album we listened to, Odyssey to the West, they really weren't afraid to just completely go in a totally different direction. These guys they're sticking to a key theme. They're trying to maintain the same feel all the way through their album while not having the same song over and over.
Yeah, they make the comparison of being a jack of all trades versus being a specialist. This is more of a specialist band, specialist album. The previous one has so many different elements from lots of different genres.
I think a good comparison of it would be the previous album we listened to was an entire contained. You had a beginning, you had a middle, you had an end. I do feel like with this, it's more of maybe a single quest, as opposed to all sorts of different things happening. It's one thematic, it's one sort of a go. And unlike most black metal albums, I don't really have a favorite song. This one I do. It's this one. This song is I think the best on the album personally.
The lyrical content of this one definitely fits with that mention of it being collectivist in nature, that is black metal. Blessed be the tailors, the woodworkers, the stone cutters. Those aren't usually the heroes of stories. Those are the grunts who build those great monuments to the leaders and things like that. So it's an interesting kind of shout out. The way that he pitches it is in a very black metal way. of masks and gallows and all these spooky things. But if we have any woodworkers in the chat, thanks for doing stuff with wood. It's important.
This song's for all the tailors out there.
Tailors, you may not have expected that this would be your anthem, but it's done. Here it is.
So I think before we started talking about this, actually, there was a concept that came up about how black metal traditionally is more of a lo-fi, underproduced. Traditionally, that old school style is really underproduced. And I would say this is definitely more of the modern sense of black metal, where it is still produced, but I think one thing that they do, and why even a lot of black metal veterans, I guess as it would be, that like the old style of black metal, and is there is still that sort of fuzziness quality to the instruments. It's not super clean at all times. And I think that adds to that sort of grungy texture to it a little bit. This is not a clean sounding album, though if you actually listen to all of its pieces, there's nothing, it's not from the production. The production is very clean. It's the instruments that almost sound a little like they picked up some rusty guitars, maybe.
We joked about that yesterday on stream, I think, about how, historically speaking, one of the hallmarks of black metal is bad production, so you almost lose your street cred as a black metal band if you up the production value too much.
Yep.
And this still has that old school buzz, even though it was probably recorded in a studio, not a garage.
They just added the buzz in post, you see.
Yeah.
It's not even necessarily a lot of content to that song. It's not overly complex. It doesn't really stray from its style at all, but I don't know, there's something about that song I just really think that they did a fantastic job with it.
In my opinion, this album and we haven't gone over it, but Age of Excuse, their next album, are kind of like the hatch gas pool of black metal right now, where it's not super pointed in any given direction, but if it's done perfectly, then it's the most solid stuff in the game. For those who don't understand the StarCraft reference, hatch gas pool is the go-to macro opener for all three matchups. You can defend cheese and it's economic enough to work, so it's like the middle of the road thing. And we talked about that with regards to this being more true standard black metal rather than something that had a particular point of flair.
Yeah, they're not reinventing the wheel. They're just kind of updating it.
Mm-hmm.
So Cobra brought up a really good comment, and I think it actually speaks to why some people don't like to get into black metal, even if they like death metal and deathcore. It's a pretty big leap to go then to black metal. And I think that is where the production value can come in and take effect. And I think that Cobra Venom is actually a really shining example of this. He does a lot of production, and it's his job to make sure that things sound as clean as possible. So when you hear black metal and they're purposefully not fixing the things that they could, or leaving it to sound a bit grungier or less produced, I could definitely see that getting on some people's nerves.
A thing that Mgla points out in this album that I think is not well understood is the difference between pain and depression. That line that he said, as if we could actually feel something. Depression is more of a numbness than an active, painful suffering. It's the inability to feel. And yeah, this album talks about that a lot. A lot of the dark side of existence, the oppression, the pain, the delusion as well. I'm not sure exactly the context of it, but he talks about 12 men choking on nothingness. I think of that as the 12 disciples, and if the doctrine is not correct, then they are basically getting overwhelmed by something that is fictitious. And that highlights a lot of the futility of the pursuit of faith and religion in the world, and how not all the religions can be correct. There are so many that most of them are going to be pretty much dead wrong. That's a pretty dark thought.
Yeah, I think they definitely have a lot of they take a lot of analogy, and specifically, you know, it's a theme of black metal to kind of poke at Christianity and a lot of the content of this album is, I think, geared towards expressing that that sort of hopelessness in looking at the pursuit of religion, or even just the, I guess, to take from the album itself, the futility of even trying to understand. That is the album.
Oh man. One of those ones that just, it can't seem to get old for me.
Yeah, it really does not seem to die out at all. That's for sure.
I like...
There's something about it that keeps it fresh.
Yeah, I think it's the execution is so consistently on point all the way through. The album doesn't have any weak points. For Odyssey to the West, there's so much range to it. There are definitely certain parts that are like, yeah, I'll wait until this is over. The carnival part in it, where that other voice comes in and he has that kind of snarl to it, it's not really my jam. I can see why they did that, and it does add an interesting element, but it's not like a, oh yeah, this part's here now. But with Exercise in Futility, it's shorter and it's more consistent in its style all the way through. and I really like its style and its execution. So there's not a single track that I'd be like, yeah, maybe I'll skip this one, or this one isn't my favorite. They're all kind of on par. I think I agree with you in the best song of the album. I think the one that I mentioned is the one that I usually think of first. But yeah, it's really, really good stuff. And I would recommend to take a pass at the lyrics too. It's not really the kind of thing that makes you feel good. That is overlap with Odyssey to the West as well. Certain albums are empowering to the listener. This, it seems less empowering. It can encourage you to reflect in certain ways. If you're taking things for granted or making assumptions that are wrong, or not evaluating the reasons behind things, that can be cool.
I'll kind of take a poke at something you just said, actually. It doesn't make you feel good. And though the content of the album itself is certainly really grim, it's not expressing anything that's happy by any means. I would argue that you could definitely feel good by... what's the best way to put this? It doesn't have to be a happy emotion to feel kind of good. You don't feel good from, working out. You feel tired. You feel sore. But at the end of it, you still feel good.
Yeah, I think I meant existentially, it is a depressing set of topics that are not encouraging to your worldview. Listening to it is a very enjoyable experience, and on a personal level, I feel good listening to it. It's kind of a celebration of the darkness of humanity, I guess. But celebration is not really the best word to use there. It articulates it and expresses it in a really awesome way that feels badass and it's fun to listen to. So in that sense, yeah, I think I used a broad phrase that wasn't really the most specific for how I feel. Because I'll listen to that when I work out, and it does pump me up, which I guess you could say is a feel-good aspect to it. When I think about the lyrics, there are certain albums I listen to. We listened to Caladan Brood, Echoes of Battle. That one has a lot more, we're going to go fight, and we're fighting for stuff that matters, and these are legendary things that we're going to be doing. And even if we die, it's worthwhile. That's the kind of like pump you up, like this is awesome and there's hope. This is like there's futility, it's all for nothing and shit, but it's done in such an amazing way that's also truthful that I can really get into it a lot. That's part of what moved me from Christian pop to Christian rock to Christian metal. Whether you're a believer in this, that, or the other faith, whatever your stance is on things, there are better or worse parts of life, and music can articulate that range of emotion, but it can't do everything at once. And this, I think, really hits home for the dark side of things in a way that is just super killer and awesome.
Yeah, I definitely think, one of the reasons that black metal is such a niche genre, but also really, again, a loyal one. Like, people that listen have a huge, huge sense of emotion and are really, really enjoy it. I don't know anyone that kind of likes black metal. I don't know anyone that's like, yeah, every now and again I'll listen to it, but it's not really my thing. You're either usually in or you're out. You either get it and it's for you, or you're not really a fan. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it's pretty much the only genre of music that tries to tackle those sort of things in a very direct way. They really don't fuck around. They really don't veil things behind happiness or everything's gonna be okay. They really just in your face tell you that, listen, sometimes things are really fun. Sometimes things are just actually terrible, and it's not really up to you, and it's worthless to sometimes do things. That doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do them. I think that's where some people can mistake the intention of black metal. It's not necessarily saying, well, life is hopeless and you shouldn't do that, but it is certainly covering the truth of the matter. And like you mentioned earlier, in Odyssey of the West, not everything you do is going to succeed, and not everything you do is for the better, even if your intentions are. Sometimes you still end up failing. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, it's just not going to happen. And that's a really shitty concept. That's a really awful thing to try to think about. But if you face it kind of head on and you sort of accept that, it can also be pretty liberating to think, to embrace that concept and not let it scare you. It's sort of in a way of facing your fear. This is like, I guess, listening to black metal is in some small way reminiscent to getting a tattoo or something of something that's a painful reminder.
Yeah, I know there are quite a few viewers who don't listen to it on their own time, but when they hear it, they can appreciate it. There are quite a few genres of music that I say fit into that category for me. And this is part of the fun of music discussion, is not just listening to two people hear an album and then talk about it for the purpose of making that your content as well, but just understanding why people like it for what it is. Because sometimes it can be hard to tell. When you hear it, it just sounds like, why would someone put themselves through this? But with a little bit of context, you can at least have that understanding, even if you're not on the same page as them and going to seek out the same stuff. Toon says that he's studying music as a degree. Pretty much every genre outside of his core ones. You have the it's cool. I see where they're going and I appreciate it, but I don't love it. Yeah, and that's a totally valid and fine assessment to make. One thing that some critics will do is they will try to put people in boxes of, this is legitimately good stuff and you should like this, otherwise your taste is bad. Tastes are unique, and those can be based on your prior experience of the music you've listened to. It could also be what your mental states tend to be and what's going to be the most helpful for you. Because I think that music has a lot of utility for helping you through difficult times, charging you up for having the confidence you need to do the things you want, helping you process a breakup or a difficult transition in your life, or just getting you moving in the morning when you're feeling kind of groggy. And finding the right music depends on who you are, what you're doing, what you've listened to before, and also just what your individual tastes are. That can be totally random and dealt to you. Music, I like to think about like food, and black metal is definitely more in the very spicy or like strong alcohol kind of category, where if you're having it for the first time, you kind of have that ugh reaction sometimes.
Yeah, it's abrasive. It's even as somebody who's listened to the genre over and over and willingly seeks it out, there's still black metal bands that I go, this is good, and sort of to speak to what ToonCon, I would say this is good. I can appreciate it. I think there's a difference though between being able to appreciate music and liking it. Just because technically you can say, I can see what they did here. This is really complex. This is really well thought out. Doesn't mean you have to enjoy it. It just might not fit with your palate. Just because a chef is extremely good at making a food that you hate doesn't mean you're gonna like that food. Or maybe it will. Who knows? I would say Mgla, this album here, is a gateway black metal album. I could definitely see some black metal converters for this.
I gradually moved up in intensity for rock to metal. If I can give like a short version of the musical journey series that I did, it was going from stuff like Creed, POD, into Linkin Park that had a little bit of screaming, but it wasn't the main part of the vocal content, into a band that was kind of like what's in Odyssey to the West a little bit, where it's almost half screamed consistently. That was Project 86. Into stuff like Demon Hunter, which is new metal, and then got my first black metal album, which was X-Toll, a Christian black metal band.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as Christian black metal fans do, you run out of CDs, so you get a secular Demi Borgia album, and you're off to the races. Well, I like these two. I know that we should do Age of Excuse as well. Are there any other ones that you've had in mind? Because I got to pick the one that neither of us have heard. And then we both heard Exercises in Futility a bajillion times.
Yes, I know that there are for sure black metal albums I think that we should listen to. What they are off the top of my head, I think we should do a Summoning album. As both big Tolkien fans, I think that would be pretty awesome. That kind of goes more hand in hand with the traditional black metal style. I'm a big fan of Summoning, and they're a band entirely based around the works of Lord of the Rings.
For a reference point, if anyone has heard our music session before, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I have listened to Summoning, I've listened to one of their albums through a few times, but I'm probably not as big of a fan as you. It's of a similar style as Caladan Brood.
In some ways, yes. So actually, one of the really good albums of theirs is a tribute album, where I think it's about 2.5 hours long or so. But Caladan Brood, for instance, the last song on that album is a bonus track. That's for that album, the tribute album.
Mm-hmm. You put things into 2. I can't listen to it 1 song a day. Sure, put it on, actively listen to it. Yeah, I do try to challenge myself sometimes and listen to something that's a little bit outside my comfort zone and give it more than 1 listen. There are quite a few albums that when I heard it the first time, I was like, eh. And then once you get to know the main phrases and you can anticipate those and you get to the nuance, then it can really open up and be impressive. Slice the Cake, Odyssey to the West was like that for me. I heard one of the songs that was requested through Song Request by Morris. And then I got the album, and it's so heckin' long that I didn't listen through it all the way through on repeat. I would listen through maybe the first 3 or so tracks, which included the one that he requested, which I was familiar with. And then I kind of built up my desire to work through it to the point where now I just put it on and go through the whole thing. So the way that you digest an album doesn't always have to be the same. It can vary on the type of music that it is and also the length of the release, the tones in it. Do you ever listen to albums and you have maybe all the tracks on your computer and you remove some?
Oh, you know what? That's an interesting question. I don't know that I've ever done that. I will skip some songs, but with black metal, usually it's either an all in or all out kind of thing. I don't know of a ton that I'm just like, this whole thing except this one.
I think there have been a couple like that.
Have you done that?
Yeah, sometimes there's a band that has a instrumental piece that to me makes almost no sense. It's like all different instruments and things from the other ones, and it's like, why did you do this? For those, you can skip it. But yeah, I would say it's a comparatively rare thing. But I know a lot of people will just get a single of a band and they're good with that. And they don't really need to go for everything. And that's okay. You can choose your own adventure.
Yeah, you certainly don't have to love every single song on an.
But you can if you listen to Exercises in Futility by Mgla.
Yes, I can't think of a single song on that album that I don't think is just amazing. Age of Excuse was kind of an interesting listen at first. I think because they were such because Exercises in Futility was just such an awesome album, they kind of really had some big eyes looking at them. People were expecting a lot. And Age of Excuse, at first, when you listen to it, it's not necessarily like the absolute best. But after 1, 2, 3 listens to it, I think I even told you that it's a little underwhelming at first, but if you continue listening to it, it's not going to disappoint you. And that is a lot of the times with challenging music, I find that's the case. At first, maybe it doesn't hit you in the right way, or the complexity of it seems like just kind of random chaos. And I don't really, while I like complex music, I don't like music that I feel doesn't make sense. And so it can sometimes be a really fine line. Sometimes some songs are really complex and deep and technical and people love it, but I just can't make sense of it, and so I shy away from it. And then there's others that I really can get into that complexity and the stylized changes, and I really love it.
Yeah, I think we don't need to spoil it too much because we will go over it. But the brand new album, because my expectations were so high, I listened through it, and I think I told you in your stream, like, yeah, it didn't really hit me as much. But after a few listens, the way that the whole album builds up toward the end is actually really, really good, and it's something that doesn't happen as much in Exercises in Futility. So they did create a different overall flow of the album for a different end result that is an improvement in its own way. Is it better overall? I wouldn't be able to firmly say yes or no, but I definitely would put that album in the category of ones that didn't really blow me out of the water the first time because I expected a 10 out of 10 and it didn't feel like that initially, but now it does.
Yeah. I would say Age of Excuse is a really solid album on its own, but I often go to it when I maybe have just listened to Exercise in Futility. I don't necessarily want to listen to the whole thing again, but I don't want to stop listening to Mgla. So I'm like, oh yeah, they have this other album that's amazing. Let me put that on.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of a shame because I feel like that album really does have the power to just rest on its own. It doesn't really need to be like, oh, it's a good second place. I think it's a first place album. It's just a little more. It's not what people expected. Once you get a 10 out of 10, people expect a certain thing.
Well, sweet. I had a lot of fun with this discussion as the previous ones, and like I said, music discussion with apoptosis was the first thing suggested in my Patreon suggestion post, so apparently some people enjoy this.
Well, thank you for suggesting that, Patreon person, because I love doing this as well. This is a lot of.
Cool. With that, I think we can